In this edition of Interview, we're joined by Jim Mellon, businessman, philanthropist, and I guess world educator. That fair to say?
Well, I think world educator is a bit grandiose, but I'm certainly a business guy, and occasionally I give money away. So I suppose the second one is true as well.
Well, it's lovely to have you here in Dubai. And
very happy to be here.
You're talking quite a bit at the moment about the agrarian revolution that is coming. And obviously you've got a book out at the moment, Moo's Law. Can you tell me a bit about the background to that?
Well, we're going through, I mean, you and I, Jane, we just had our masks on, which is an unfortunate side effect of the pandemic. And where did that pandemic come from? Probably from food malpractice in the Far East. Where will the next pandemic come from? Probably food malpractice in the Far East. 80% of antibiotics go into farmed animals. And that causes a real risk of bacterial infection that gets out of control, and antibiotics don't work. So we need to do something to mitigate pandemic risk. 20% of all the global emissions that cause the global warming that we are all worried about at the moment come from intensive farming of animals. So if you didn't intensively farm animals and you grew their beef in factories instead, or their meats in factories instead, you wouldn't have that emission. 1/5 of emissions could be eliminated, which is fantastic. 80 billion animals are killed every year for human consumption, and 2 trillion fish. We can get to the point where that can be eliminated, and that's a motivating cause for me. But there are lots of good things about this new agrarian revolution, and it's happening right now.
What does that mean for the existing industries?
It's a very good question. So in the case of farmers who produce meat, they're going to have to find something else to do, a bit like miners had to find something else to do from the 1950s to the 1990s, or horse and cart drivers had to find something else to do when the motor car came along. But progress always produces new and higher paid and better jobs. And you know, farming is a back-breaking profession. It's a very precarious profession, and maybe the new industries that result from what we're doing will be better for people in general. And so there will be change, but change is always good.
What do you predict for the future of the global food industry then?
My predictions are threefold. First of all, in the next 10 years, dairy products as we currently know them, which are cows being milked to produce milk, which then goes into cheese or yogurt or whatever, will be gone. There won't be any. It's an industry that is in terminal decline. The second thing is in meat. Half of the world's meat will be plant-based, of the type that we're familiar with now, or cell-based agriculture, where the meat is produced in laboratories to very high specifications and is identical to the best in species. And then half of the world's fish in 10 years' time will come from the same type of production. And fish is something that is really relevant, because if you eat a lot of fish, in the past it was good for you. Today the fish has microplastics, toxins, lots of antibiotics, because half of the fish that are produced in fish farms. It's not good to eat fish more than twice a week.
You talk there about antibiotics and going into the food groups which are then being consumed by humans. What needs to be done on a global level, I guess, and governmental level to make sure that action is taken now?
Well, I mean, antibiotics are one thing, then you've got sugar, salt, all the bad things that create so much disease in the world. You know, there's an epidemic, everyone knows, of diabetes, and it's because of the amount of sugar that's going into food. If I could put it this way, in 1980 in China, 1% of the population had diabetes. Today, have a guess what percentage it is?
Quadrupled, probably.
That's 13%. So that it's gone up 13 times, and it's entirely because of the introduction of the Western diet, and particularly of sugar. So food companies at the moment are selling, in many cases, junk to people.
Is water one of our global resources that we're going to have to worry about moving forwards?
Absolutely. I mean, water is in all the wrong places. I don't know if you know, but the amount of water on the planet has been identical since the world started. It's exactly the same amount of water. It's just distributed in the wrong way. 1 kilo of beef takes 15,000 litres of water to produce. I mean, that's a huge amount of water wastage. So we have to do something about reducing water use. It's a very good point. And this stuff uses, you know, the cell agriculture, the plant-based foods use a tiny fraction of the water that's used in conventional farming.
When we look to Europe, you know, we had Brexit happening and then the pandemic hit, you know, will we economically be able to bounce back?
Yeah, well, the UK is back to the level it was pre-pandemic. I think the Europeans are slightly behind, but that's because their vaccination program was so far behind, but they'll get there. America's looks like it's completely booming at the moment. But a lot of that is because of the huge printing of money. And as you well know, you print a lot of money, you devalue the money, you get inflation. So we're seeing the beginnings of inflation. It's a judgment call as to whether it was a good thing to print all that money. But I think now that we're coming out of the pandemic, they need to tighten the reins a bit, because you can't have all this surplus money without inflation, which is very destructive, and particularly to poorer people, because it ruins the savings of the poorer people. It just wipes them out, literally, inflation does.
Jim Mellon, thank you so much for talking to us on Interview today.
It's my pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you.